streets of modern-day Rome lies a network of interconnected tunnels that stretch for hundreds of kilometers. These are Rome's catacombs. They're over 1,500 years old, and they contain many of Rome's ancient dead. In 2003, deep within this subterranean labyrinth, a bricked-up tomb was discovered, unlike anything seen before in Rome.
Je n'ai jamais fouillé de site avec autant de corps. C'est irréel.
Les inhumations que l'on a ici ne ressemblent absolument pas aux inhumations qu'on a dans le reste de ce complexe funéraire.
This was an ancient mass grave, piled high with thousands of skeletons. As a classical historian, I've studied burials across the Roman world, and I've never seen anything like this.
Who were these people? What did they die of? And why are they buried here in this extraordinary manner?
For the last 10 years, an international team have been trying to find out. Combining archaeology with cutting-edge science, they're looking for clues in the layout of the tomb, in personal possessions, and in the bones themselves.
Nous, juste notre intérêt, c'est d'essayer de comprendre qui ils étaient. Donc, quelque part, c'est un peu leur redonner vie.
Joining the archaeologists is one of the world's leading specialists in decoding ancient DNA. He's trying to find out how these people died.
This might be related to a catastrophe, to some kind of pandemic, some kind of disease spreading. A chance find. A tomb that confirms all expectations and multiple mass deaths.
This is the mystery of Rome's X-Tombs. Rome's catacombs have been explored and excavated for centuries, and by and large their use, their layout, their architecture fairly well understood. But then a chance discovery in one of these catacombs opened up a whole new mystery. This is the catacomb of St. Marcellinus and St. Peter. It was here in the summer of 2003. A burst water main caused the roof in one of the tunnels to collapse. The Vatican's Inspector of Catacombs in Rome, Raffaella Giuliani, was called in to investigate.
All'inizio io non sono stata particolarmente sorpresa perché è un evento che si verifica abbastanza frequentemente nelle catacombe, appunto. Poi andando avanti invece le cose sono cambiate. Proprio qui sopra si è aperta quella voragine che ha causato un po' l'inizio di tutta l'avventura.
The first thing they found was the remains of a medieval fresco. The painting is believed to show the two 4th century patron saints of the catacomb, Marcellinus, a priest, and Peter, an exorcist. They appear to be standing guard over a burial chamber.
Quando troviamo degli affreschi altomedievali, degli interventi medievali in catacomba, sono sicuramente dovuti alla presenza della tomba di un martire.
But nothing could have prepared Raffaella for what lay hidden behind the fresco.
Abbiamo trovato questi ambienti che erano completamente pieni di scheletri sovrapposti.
they had uncovered a mass grave.
Questo nella carriera di un archeologo cristiano è un elemento di grande prestigio, di grande importanza, e quindi questo è stato sicuramente un elemento per me di proprio entusiasmante.
The burial site was located in an area of the Vatican's underground mapping system labeled X. They came to be known as the X-Tombs. To find out if this was the last resting place of hundreds of Christian martyrs, the Vatican sought specialist help. A team of French archaeologists were called in, led by Dominique Cassex and Philippe Blanchard. Both are highly experienced in excavating ancient mass graves.
Et l'ouverture, c'est juste là.
Oui, voilà, nous arrivons.
Parlez-moi de vos premières impressions la première fois que vous avez venu ici.
Quand je suis arrivé ici, j'ai découvert ces quantités d'os. On n'a pas d'espace de circulation, donc il faut s'adapter.
As excavations began, 6 more chambers were uncovered, each piled high with bodies. The tombs were arranged on 3 separate levels, all located around a central hub. We need to completely forget these modern walls here, which are actually working as foundations to stop the 6 meters or so of rock above our heads from collapsing on us. This is the crucial bit. This is the largest of the burial chambers. And the archaeologists estimate that there's just under a meter, about 80 centimeters left of compressed bodies still to excavate. There's another tomb there that was full of bodies that the archaeologists have now removed, and there's another 1, 2, 3 burial chambers behind it. So when we stand here, we are surrounded by chambers of mass death. Picking their way through the bones, a few personal possessions came to light. A pair of earrings, a hairpin, and a small black ring. They also unearthed a few coins. The bones themselves revealed more clues.
Ok. On peut voir des connexions à certains endroits. Ici, vous avez toute une colonne vertébrale avec un bassin.
Un bassin là.
Ici, le fémur qui se poursuit. Des cadavres amenés ici et qui se sont décomposés ici, et pas des ossements jetés.
The fact the skeletons were still intact, with very little soil between the layers of bodies, suggests that large numbers were buried here at the same time.
Ils sont tous relativement bien déposés sur le ventre ou sur le dos. Les corps étaient déposés soigneusement les uns à côté des autres, tête bêche. Ils inversaient les pieds et la tête pour inhumer un maximum de personnes dans un espace extrêmement restreint.
This has to have been something of a mass death moment, what archaeologists call a crisis event. Multiple people dying within a very short space of time. But was this one single event, or a sequence of events? To
To investigate further, the team made a detailed study of one of the tombs where all the bodies had been excavated and accounted for. By digitally restoring the flesh to the bones, a computer program was used to work out the original volume of the bodies.
Ça dépassait l'ensemble des corps, leur volume dépassait le volume de la salle.
Alors ça veut dire, c'est très important, hein, ça veut dire que ça peut pas être une dépôt totalement simultanée, parce qu'il n'y a pas suffisamment de ça.
Voilà, ce qui est évident, c'est que les corps ont été obligatoirement déposés en plusieurs fois. Le problème, c'est qu'on ne sait pas justement en combien de fois, et on ne connaît pas l'intervalle de temps entre le début et la fin.
This study suggests these are the victims of a series of mass death events. Currently, the archaeologists estimate the tombs contain the bodies of around 2,500 people.
This is an incredibly unusual discovery. Tombs packed full of bodies layered on top of one another. You just don't expect to find this type of burial in a Roman catacomb. I've studied the way the Romans buried their dead, and it's clear that they had great respect for their deceased. Burial in Rome was governed by two guiding principles. The first was you couldn't be buried in the city, but the second was you didn't want to be buried too far from the city because you wanted your family to visit your tomb, but perhaps more importantly, you wanted to show off. This is the ancient Via Appia, one of the main roads out of Rome. But every road outside the city walls would have been crammed with tombs like these. It was Dionysius of Halicarnassus in the 1st century BC that said the endlessness of tombs on the roads leading out of Rome mirrored the endlessness of the Roman world itself. But as the population of Rome expanded during the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, the space available became increasingly limited. Now, given the persistent desire amongst Romans to be buried in suburban soil, you can see how very quickly it became a pressing problem, what to do with the dead. And the solution, as far as the Romans were concerned, was to go underground. Rome was built on a soft volcanic rock called tufa, which could be carved out by hand. These sprawling subterranean cemeteries grew rapidly under the city, but they look quite different to the ex-tombs. Despite the fact that the corridors in a typical catacomb meander every which way, the layout of the dead was actually fairly regularized. You had your individual tombs called loculi, but I always refer to them as bunk beds. There's still the bones of one poor individual left there. And if you wanted something a bit more special, then you could have a cubicula, a bedroom for the entire family to be put to rest in. What was so good and so new about catacombs was their limitless potential for expansion and as a result inclusion, which made them really popular with communities, be it pagan, be it Jewish, or indeed most importantly with the increasing number of Christian communities in Rome during the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. And over time, as a result, they became a burial place not just for ordinary Christians, but for their saints, their popes, and their martyrs. As excavations continue, the bones from the ex-tombs are removed and kept in a makeshift storeroom for further analysis. So far, the French team have made a detailed study of around 500 bodies. They're starting to build up a picture of who these people were.
Quand on regarde sur le bassin,
From the pelvis bones, they can tell there is a mixture of men and women. The size and stage of development of the femur bones also gives an idea of their age when they died.
On a le fémur droit qui va s'articuler ici et la tête est entièrement formée. On n'a pas de ligne de soudure, donc là on a le fémur adulte.
La plupart sont des adultes.
Donc on a une grande quantité d'ossements qui se trouvent dans la frange de subadulte-adulte.
These people certainly didn't die of old age. But are there any signs of trauma? If they were Christian martyrs or died a violent death, you'd expect to see evidence on the bones.
Sur 500 individus, on aurait quand même dû trouver à un moment des indices de coups ou de lésions particulières sur le squelette qu'on n'a pas.
None of the bones show any signs of trauma that one would expect if someone had been crucified, or indeed if they died in battle in some sort of massacre. So who were they? Why were they buried down here like this? And when did they die? One way to establish a possible date for the tombs and their occupants is to study the few personal belongings uncovered with them. The earrings were made from fine gold. They have a design that became popular in the 1st century AD. The ring was found to be made of jet, a material Romans thought had magical powers. Studying its chemical composition, the archaeologists have concluded it came all the way from Whitby, North Yorkshire, in the 3rd century AD. Then there were the coins, possibly left as payment to enter the afterlife. Their age is much easier to establish. The oldest coin is of the 10th Emperor Titus, dating from AD 79 to 81. The wife of the Emperor Antoninus Pius features on another, as does the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, both dating from the 2nd century AD. The last coin was of Emperor Gordian. It's a rarer find than the others. He only reigned for 3 weeks in AD 238.
Coins are fantastic, they really help us narrow down a range, but there are caveats. You carry coins around in your pocket for a long time, they exist in circulation for ages, and the archaeological contexts here in which these coins were found are not secure.
To try and get a more accurate date for the bodies, the archaeologists wanted to test the bones using carbon dating. But this proved quite difficult.
Le collagène qui nous permet la datation n'était pas toujours préservé. Donc nous avons tenté beaucoup de datations, nous avons pu en obtenir une dizaine, qui sont assez bien répartis sur tous les secteurs.
Carbon dating works by comparing the ratio of 2 forms of carbon, carbon 12 and carbon 14. When you die, any carbon 14 decays over time to become nitrogen, but the level of carbon 12 in your cells stays the same. Over time, the ratio between the 2 forms of carbon changes, and it's this that gives you the date. The breakthrough here is that the different chambers of the X-tombs came back with different results. The bodies from the 2 larger chambers date from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. But some of the bodies from the smaller tombs appear to have died in the 1st century AD. These dates suggest the first burials took place here, possibly up to 200 years before work began
on the surrounding catacomb of St. Marcellinus and St. Peter. The fact that these tombs predate the catacombs that surround them raises the intriguing possibility that this could be the original core from which the catacombs later expanded outwards.
Peut-être tout serait né à partir de ce réseau central. Peut-être la redécouverte à un moment de cet ensemble qui aurait pu être interprété finalement comme un ensemble de martyrs.
This is an exciting revelation. The X-tombs could be among the oldest underground tombs found anywhere in Rome. The dating provided by the coins and the bones and the other finds indicate that these people died between the end 1st century AD and the early part of the 3rd century AD. Now that period of time in Roman history was, by all accounts, a golden age. Some of Rome's finest imperial buildings were completed at this time. The Colosseum, great bath complexes, and ever larger public forums. The 18th century British historian Edward Gibbon described it as the period in the history of the world during which the condition of the human race was most happy and prosperous. The people of the X-tombs were living at the centre of a vast and powerful empire. At its height, the Roman Empire spanned 3 continents, 5 million square kilometres, and its territories stretched from North Africa, Egypt, the Middle East, Asia Minor, across Europe, and of course up to the border with Scotland. And at the very heart of it was Rome, Caput Mundi as they called it, the capital of the world. The city was a mixture of cultures and traditions, with trade links that spanned the known world. In the markets of Rome you could find anything. Copper, gold, olive oil from Spain, cotton, wheat from Egypt, tin from Britain, iron from Germany, and more luxury products from further afield, like silks from China, or gems, pearls, spices from India. Rome was a multicultural city, full of people and products from around the empire and beyond. This was the world's first metropolis with a population of over 1 million souls. And the people of the X-tombs lived and died in this cosmopolitan melting pot. At their lab in Bordeaux, the French team are searching for more clues to the possible identity of these people. Kevin Salles is analysing the chemical makeup of the bones and teeth in a process called isotopic analysis. This looks at the various atomic forms, or isotopes, of chemical elements like oxygen and carbon found in organic remains. The minerals in your teeth are set when you're a young child and they don't change throughout your life, whereas your bones keep remodelling themselves, so they tell us about where you spent the last part of your life. And by comparing the two, we can find out whether these people were originally from Rome or whether they came from elsewhere and migrated to the city.
Ici, vous avez représenté les résultats obtenus sur les dents, et ici, vous avez représenté les résultats obtenus pour l'os. On a une population qui se distingue des autres populations que l'on connaît en Italie, à Rome contemporaine, mais l'os nous indique les dernières années de la vie. Ces individus ont vraisemblablement bougé de région, changé de région. Donc ce groupe est caractérisé par cette forte mobilité. Par contre, il semblerait un peu difficile à ce stade-là de pouvoir préciser plus précisément quelle région du monde ou de l'Europe viendraient ces individus.
In a second study, Kevin is able to explore what sort of foods they might have eaten. Their bones reveal a diet rich in meat and fish, more than found in other communities in Rome at that time. These people must have been fairly wealthy.
What's coming through very strongly in the archaeological analysis is that the people of the ex-tombs were not from Rome. They came to Rome, but where they were from initially, well, that's a question that the archaeology is still struggling with. There are some indications that it may have been Central Europe, but also from elsewhere. This doesn't seem to have been a homogeneous population all from the same place. But they came to Rome, they lived in Rome, and they died all together in Rome.
The French team are starting to build a picture of who these people were and how they lived, but they also want to find out how they died. We know they weren't martyred. We know from the dating that bodies were deposited here possibly over a 200-year period. We also know they were carefully packed in, several layers deep at a time. And that there was a series of separate mass burials.
What the archaeology is showing is fascinating. That piles of bodies were put in these tombs on top of already partly decomposed bodies. So what we've got is waves of mass death. We know it wasn't massacres, so the best hypothesis for what could have caused this has to be disease.
Disease was rife in the capital, from tuberculosis to typhoid, leprosy to malaria. During the time of the ex-tombs, diseases like these are thought to have killed over 30,000 residents each year. Much of this was down to living conditions. Most of Rome's citizens lived in the world's first high-rise apartment blocks. They were called insulae, or islands, and there were thousands of them, densely packed into the city.
This is the Insula d'Aracelli. It dates from the 2nd century and would have stood at least 5 stories tall. Down there is the ancient Roman ground level. That's where the floor was, and the first levels are shops and inns, and then as you go up, you get the private apartments. But you know what? You wouldn't want to be in the penthouse here.
The lower floors were rented to wealthy tenants. The upper levels were for the less well-off. The apartments were smaller, the number of people in each room increased, and living conditions were just awful.
The Roman writer Martial talks about a chap who had to run up 200 steps to get up to his apartment. And what could he expect when he got there? Well, not much. Cramped living conditions, dirty, probably a leaky roof, vermin, families, groups of labourers all squeezed into these spaces. I mean, to call these places homes is overkill. They were a place to put your head down at night, and not a very pleasant one even then.
Aqueducts brought in fresh water, and the city had an impressive drainage system. But the people of Rome still lived in filth.
All rubbish basically just got shoved in the street, and then the public system of fountains washed it into the drains. But then, well, frankly, there's the poo. At its height, the population of Rome, it's estimated, was producing 50,000 kilograms of excrement a day.
And none of these apartments were connected directly to the drains. You had to take your chamber pot and get rid of it. More likely as not, straight out the window.
The people of the Extumes may have lived during Rome's golden age, but the streets of the capital were more like an open sewer. Disease raged through the city. And there was no escape, even at the famous baths. The Romans loved their baths. It was a great place to relax, soak, have a massage, scrub down, chat with friends, or catch up on the gossip. It was an incredibly important part of what it meant to be Roman, and it was a practice enjoyed by everyone from the emperor all the way down. The people of the Extumes would have certainly gone to the baths. They were part of the social glue that bound all Romans together. The baths were attended by rich and poor, young and old, healthy and diseased. In fact, we know that Roman doctors actually prescribed a good soak in the baths for all sorts of ailments. So if you had everything from boils to rabies, from diarrhea to tuberculosis, you came to the baths. Poor people who didn't have a slave to rub them down were encouraged to rub themselves against the walls. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder noted that scrapings taken from walls had warming properties. Long before antibiotics, these scrapings were prescribed in ointments to soothe sores and cure abscesses. The sick and the healthy bathed together because the Romans simply had no real idea of how disease spread. The only thing that seems really to have bothered them is seeing the physical signs of disease. So if you had pus-filled boils or weeping sores, then they asked you to keep your clothes on while in the baths. Sometimes they just put all the lamps out. The baths really were the perfect place to catch a disease. New strains of disease were constantly being brought into the city by traders, migrants and soldiers. You can easily see how the people of the Extumes might have succumbed to waves of infection. To try to find out what disease might have killed them, the French team have drafted in a world expert in reconstructing ancient DNA. Johannes Krause is a professor of paleogenetics. His previous work was on the Black Death, which struck Europe in the 14th century, killing millions. By extracting DNA from bones from a mass grave site in central London, he proved that the Black Death was caused by the bubonic plague. Here in the Extumes, he faces a greater challenge. The bones are much older. There may be very little DNA left behind from any disease-causing microbes or pathogens.
So what we want to have is the genetic material of the pathogen itself. So we're trying to find places in the skeleton that still might have the pathogen DNA preserved. And what we have found is the best container for the genetic information are actually teeth.
How do you pick the particular teeth that you're going to work with?
We try to identify teeth that are still intact, that don't have a crack or some hole in the surface. And inside those teeth, we might have a little bit of dried blood where the pathogen DNA might still be present. So we can actually see that the jaw is just sticking out here. You can actually see the teeth here being exposed. And it's just perfect to actually get in here. Yes, perfect. Look at that. Wow. Oh my god, you see how wet that is as well. That's a molar on the left. On the left. Okay.
Teeth are photographed, catalogued, and bagged up, ready for transportation back to his lab in Germany.
Hopefully we have a little bit of the pathogen DNA that we can also get out of those teeth and then reconstruct the DNA, reconstruct the entire genome.
Johannes believes that some of the people here in the X-tombs might have been killed by one of the most virulent epidemics ever to strike the Roman Empire. This devastating disease was first recorded around AD 165, when the empire was ruled by two brothers.
It was called the Antonine Plague because of the family name of the two ruling emperor brothers, Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus. Now, the origins of this plague are shrouded in mystery, but there are reports that it emerged in the East, where in the early 160s AD, Lucius Verus was campaigning against the Parthians on the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire in what is today's Iran and Iraq.
A contemporary account from the pages of the Historia Augusta tells us a pestilent breeze arose in a temple of Apollo from a golden casket, which a soldier had cut open, and it spread thence over Parthia and the whole world. The disease swept through the Roman army just at the time when the empire was challenged by invasions from the north.
In 168 AD, the emperor brothers came here, to Aquileia in northern Italy. Now, Aquileia was a major trading centre, but it was also a major military centre, and it was to here that many of the Roman troops had been pulled back from the east, and it was from Aquileia that the emperors wanted to mount a campaign to push back invading tribes from the north that were threatening the Italian frontier. But when they got here, the emperors realised that the real problem wasn't the invading tribes, it was the plague.
Army regiments would camp near towns and villages, and soldiers often returned home on leave. It wasn't long before the Antonine Plague passed into the civilian population.
The Roman Empire was a vast, integrated, connected trading network, which also contributed to the plague being able to spread so far, so quickly. It was in Italy, it was in parts of Central Europe, it was in the East, it was in Egypt. There's even one report that it made it as far as China. And of course, as the saying goes, all roads lead to Rome.
Plague struck the capital, there was panic and public hysteria. Priests were summoned and religious rites performed to purify the city. The people of the X-tombs would have been vulnerable just like everyone else. According to Roman consul and writer Dio Cassius, 2,000 people often died in Rome in a single day.
In his books, the Emperor's physician Galen described some of the symptoms of the Antonine Plague: a fever, a rash, diarrhea, foul-smelling feces, an ulceration of the windpipe, and dry pustular eruptions on the skin. No one knows for sure what actual disease was responsible for the Antonine Plague. We do know it claimed more lives than any previously recorded epidemic. Across the empire, something like 5 million people were killed, up to 1/10 of the entire Roman population. The plague struck in waves that lasted from AD 165 to 180, then again in 189. It's entirely possible that some of the people in the X-tombs living in Rome at that time were killed by this disease that shook the empire. In his lab in Germany, Johannes and his colleague Kirsten Boss are trying to extract DNA from the teeth samples taken from the tombs.
I drilled out the pulp from inside the tooth, which is now powder. That powder now goes into a solution, and the DNA gets released from the bone.
So our answer could be in that tube.
I hope so very much.
This process creates a mixture of billions of DNA molecules. It's a cocktail containing all manner of genetic material, but mostly soil microbes, plants, and fungi that were present in the tombs.
It's kind of like looking for the needle in the haystack. So you have billions of molecules that we get out of those teeth, and maybe just a few hundred come from the pathogen. So there's a lot of sorting, and then there's a lot of puzzling.
To isolate any fragments of DNA left over from bacteria or viral pathogens, Johannes has adapted a technique known as DNA hybridization capture. He calls it fishing. On this glass slide are 100 short single strands of synthetic pathogen DNA. They include the genetic codes of everything from smallpox to measles, typhus to bubonic plague. The cocktail of DNA from each tooth is then added to the slide. The synthetic strands now act as bait to hook out any actual pathogen DNA from the solution.
DNA has this double strand where you have the bases facing each other, and there's always this A facing with the T, you have the G facing with the C.
And this creates the famous double helix.
Exactly.
Everyone knows the kind of picture of DNA. Okay.
And just if the right sequence kind of matches the opposite sequence, those DNA fragments will actually bind and form a double bond. If they don't match, they will not come together. It's like a magnet, basically. It only kind of pulls the DNA together if the strands matches.
So only
pathogen DNA would bind here.
But Johannes is pushing this technique to its limits. It's never been used to fish for so many possible causes of ancient disease.
We have not just looked for a single pathogen, but we've actually looked for hundreds of them in parallel, because we don't know what has killed those people. We don't know if it was one or several pathogens that were spreading in their population during that time.
And this is just the start of the process. Even if Johannes manages to isolate DNA from a disease-causing bacteria or virus, it could then take months or even years of computer analysis, comparing millions of genetic sequences to identify which specific pathogen was the cause of death.
He's got an incredibly difficult task ahead of him. But this technology, this science represents the best chance we have of finding out what killed the people of the X-Tombs.
Back underground, the French team think they're getting closer to the possible identity of the people. They've been doing tests on a white powder that was found in the tombs.
C'était très étrange. Tout début, quand on a trouvé notamment ce matériau blanchâtre qui recouvrait entièrement les corps, c'est vrai que Dominique et moi, notre première réaction a été de penser à de la chaux. L'utilisation de chaux et pour éviter la putréfaction des corps et la propagation d'épidémies. On a fait faire des analyses et on a eu les résultats qui se sont avérés être du plâtre.
It's unusual to find plaster in traditional Roman burials. And this plaster contained further clues about how they were buried.
On devine particulièrement bien le petit quadrillage qui est en fait les traces de tissu qui
sont venus s'imprimer dans le plâtre.
The presence of plaster and fabric suggests these bodies may have been bound in an intricate shroud. This would explain why the shoulders were compressed, hands resting on their pelvis, legs stretched out with ankles touching. And in among the skeletons and plaster, a second curious substance was discovered.
Dans certaines salles, au contact direct avec les ossements, on a mis au jour une très grande quantité de paillettes rouges, de très fines paillettes rouges, comme des petits cristaux. En fait, ces petites paillettes se sont avérées être de l'ambre rouge.
Amber was a very expensive material. It was used in burial sites to ensure safe passage to the afterlife. But it's rarely been found in this ground-up form, and never in this quantity. In all, several kilos were recovered from the tombs. One final piece in the puzzle was nearly overlooked altogether.
J'étais avec Dominique, nous étions penchés en train de discuter d'un squelette. Puis je vois le fil d'or. Je dis, mais Dominique, est-ce que tu as perdu un cheveu? Elle me dit, non. Je dis, dans ce cas-là, je crois qu'on a trouvé un fil d'or. C'était au tout début. Plus on a fouillé, plus on a retrouvé des fils d'or. Parfois en concentration importante, sur les épaules, sur les clavicules, des bandes de fils d'or, parfois des petits fragments.
Could the people have been buried dressed in gold embroidered clothes? What began as just a mass of bones is beginning to come into focus a little. We've got a large number of individuals who are all carefully laid out one by the other, mostly adults. And then there are all these strange finds, the white powders, the red powders. And then there's the fine gold thread, what they thought to be Dominique's hair. We're getting a clear picture now of an elaborate and expensive burial ritual for what seemed to be some very wealthy and distinctive people. In Bordeaux, more clues are coming to light. One of the French team, Delphine Henry, has been studying remnants of the fabrics that were recovered from the tombs.
on a différentes couches de tissus. Donc, vous voyez très bien qu'on a des tissus grossiers et des tissus plus fins et des tissus même très très fins à certains endroits. Les tissus très fins, très luxueux sont produits par des gens professionnels. Les tissus plus grossiers sont probablement faits par des gens à la maison.
Delphine believes she can even work out where the person who made the fabrics came from.
On fait un fil, et pour ça il faut le tordre. Et la tradition veut qu'avec un fuseau, donc c'est l'outil avec lequel on fait un fil, dans le nord de la Méditerranée, on tienne le fuseau par en haut, et la plupart des gens étant droitiers, on donne une torsion qui va produire un fil, ce qu'on appelle en Z.
C'est incroyable. Incroyable. Le Z de torsion, c'est européen en fait.
C'est une grande Europe, disons. Et en sud de la Méditerranée, on va avoir tendance à prendre le fuseau par en bas et donc à obtenir un fil de torsion S.
Alors, qu'est-ce que vous pensez que ce type d'évidence, le matériel, le système de torsion, la couleur...
Ces tissus grossiers peuvent être souvent avec les fils en S, donc de tradition plutôt du sud de la Méditerranée. Ça pourrait montrer que les gens qui ont tissé à la maison, les femmes, sont de tradition peut-être égyptienne, en tout cas du sud de la Méditerranée.
Philippe believes this cultural connection with the southern Mediterranean can be narrowed further.
En revanche, le fait de recouvrir le corps, le cadavre entièrement par du plâtre des pieds à la tête va conférer donc au corps une espèce d'apparence de momie. Ça, c'est quelque chose de très particulier. Ça, c'est vraiment une pratique funéraire qui vient d'Afrique du Nord, probablement dans la région de Tunisie, d'Algérie, parce qu'on en retrouve beaucoup là-bas.
While the scientific analyses continue, there's one remaining historical avenue I want to explore. The ground directly above the extombs was actually a site marked out for the burials of a very important group of people. That's the entrance to our tombs over there, and the big structure behind me, that's the mausoleum of St. Helena, Emperor Constantine's mum. But ignore it entirely for the moment, because it was built in the early 4th century AD, way after the time we're interested in. During that time, end 1st century to mid 3rd century AD, despite what it now looks like, car park, football pitch, this place was actually a really important cemetery for the emperor's personal cavalry. Now, their name changes over time, but they're perhaps best known as the Equites Singulares Augusti. Equites Singulares Augusti is Latin for the Emperor's Chosen Horsemen, a regiment founded in the 1st century AD. They are immortalized in reliefs on one of Rome's greatest landmarks, Trajan's Column, erected in AD 113. At the Museum of Roman Civilization, copies of the scenes are laid out so we can get a closer look. The reliefs celebrate Emperor Trajan's epic battles and ultimate victory over the Dacians, now modern-day Romania, in the early 2nd century AD. Our Equites Singulares Augusti are shown no less than 7 times on this column, and that's more than any other individual battle unit. Here they are, heading off with the Emperor Trajan into battle. These guys really were the chosen ones to share in the Emperor's most successful military campaign. This is one of my favourite scenes. The Equites Singulares Augusti in full battle gear, their helmets, their shields, their chainmail jackets, on their horses, charging in behind their emperor, Trajan, who offers the horseman's salute, the open right hand. And they're coming to the rescue of the Roman troops that are being besieged over here by the Dacians. It really is the emperor, his crack cavalry, coming to the rescue.
The Equites were the finest imperial horsemen. Most were foreigners, hand-picked as teenagers from across the empire. They were strong and by many accounts very handsome warriors. To be selected was a ticket to great wealth and high status. They protected successive emperors both in Rome and abroad for over 200 years, from the 1st to the 3rd century AD. But in AD 312, the cozy relationship between the Equites and the emperor came to an end. The Western Empire was divided by civil war between two emperors, Maxentius and Constantine. Maxentius held Rome, but Constantine marched from the north to oust his rival. In a final showdown, the two sides faced each other at the Milvian Bridge, the entry point to Rome across the river Tiber. The Equites horsemen sided with Maxentius. But Constantine was victorious.
Costantino fu abbastanza inesorabile con gli Equites Singulares Augusti perché avevano commesso un grande errore, quello di schierarsi dalla parte di Massenzio. Quindi furono distrutti, il loro corpo fu sciolto da Costantino.
Constantine even destroyed the Equites cemetery. All that remains are fragments of tombstones. Many now adorn the walls at the entrance to the catacomb of St. Marcellinus and St. Peter.
Dove c'era il loro cimitero, fu costruito un enorme complesso di cui purtroppo oggi rimane come unica significativa testimonianza solo il mausoleo dove era sepolta la madre di Costantino, l'imperatrice Elena.
The ex-tombs were in use around the same time and in the same location as the former site of the Equites cemetery, which raises an intriguing possibility. The dates of our ex-tomb bodies overlap with those of the Equites. It's unlikely that a space reserved for elites, as the Equites were, would have been used for burials of anyone completely unconnected with them.
È anche possibile che queste camere abbiano potuto accogliere i defunti degli Equites Singulares Augusti.
The people in the ex-tombs were mostly young adults, a mixture of men and women. Now, we know from surviving tombstones that the Equites were often buried with their wives and slaves.
Quando erano di stanza a Roma vivevano anche con le loro famiglie e quindi ecco la spiegazione anche delle tante donne, tante defunte di sesso femminile che sono state trovate in quei contesti.
The Equites numbered 5,000 strong. They were foreigners, selected from various occupied territories across Central Europe and also from southern Spain and North Africa. they've got connections in the funerary ritual to the southern Mediterranean, to North Africa, particularly to Tunisia and Algeria. The complex, elaborate and expensive funerary rituals with which they were buried not only mark them out also as rich, particularly that amber, but also fairly distinctive. Written accounts also tell us they were dressed in jackets embroidered with silver and gold thread. The Equites were wealthy, well-fed, and well-connected. But when overwhelmed by waves of mass death, it's conceivable that the Equites community may have converted pre-existing underground chambers, possibly disused water systems, into a mass burial site. It's only a theory, and we may never know for sure. But from all the evidence we have at the moment, it certainly seems plausible that the X-tombs could be the last resting place for over 2,000 of these great horsemen and their families, soldiers chosen to protect the Roman Emperor. What I love about this investigation is the way that it's been able to put not just the flesh back on the bones, but to have turned these skeletons back into real people. They came here to the Caput Mundi, the capital of the world, the kind of ancient Roman version of the American dream. And the irony is that it was also here in Rome that disease found its perfect breeding ground, and ultimately killed them.
Well, here tonight, Professor Mary Beard delved into the life and times of the notorious Roman emperor and tyrant Caligula. In case you missed it, you can catch up tomorrow night at 11:20.